Imagine this. You are wrongfully convicted of a crime, and the court sentences you to death. Despite your protest of innocence, the legal system moves forward with your execution. This tragic scenario is a terrifying reality for many individuals on death row. Yet we still live in a world where the death penalty is actively debated on and in some places carried out. Today, I will critically examine the death penalty, looking at both arguments in favor of it and those that oppose it. My goal is to examine the death penalty from both sides, using evidence, logical reason, to challenge the arguments that support it. Ultimately, I will argue that the death penalty is flawed, ineffective, unjust, and that it should be abolished. First, I will present two common arguments in favor of the death penalty: that it deters crime and that it serves as a form of retribution for victims. Then, I will introduce two major arguments against the death penalty: the risk of executing innocent people and the systematic biases in its application. Finally, I will argue that these concerns, backed by evidence and ethical considerations, make the death penalty a practice that must be abolished. Proponents of the death penalty often argue that it acts as a powerful deterrent to crime. The idea is simple. If potential criminals know they could face execution for committing murder, they will think twice before carrying out such violent acts. However, there is no evidence that the death penalty deters crime. In fact, studies show that it does not reduce crime rates any more effective than life in prison. Other factors, such as improvements in law enforcement and social reforms, have been proven to be much more effective in reducing violent crimes. The argument that the death penalty deters crime falls apart when we examine the data. Numerous studies have failed to establish a link between the death penalty and reducing crime rates. A 2007 study by Hashim Dekabash and Paul H. Rubin, published in the journal Economic Inquiry, found that there was no statistically significant relationship between the death penalty and homicide rates. In fact, states without the death penalty, such as Michigan, often reported a lower murder rate than those that continue to use capital punishment, such as the death penalty. Criminologists argue that the reduction in crime is more effectively achieved through reforms such as better policing, improved socioeconomic conditions, and access to mental health care. According to the National Institute of Justice, these social policies and changes in law enforcement techniques have been proven to significantly reduce crime, while the threat of execution has not. Moreover, many violent crimes are not premeditated and occur under intense emotional or psychological stress. Whether it is a crime of passion, a result of substance abuse, or committed during a mental health crisis, criminals who commit these offenses are often not considering the death penalty in the heat of the moment. Thus, the death penalty fails to deter irritational or spur-of-the-moment crimes. Another argument in favor of the death penalty is that it provides retribution or justice for victims and their families. Proponents argue that the death penalty is the only just punishment for those who commit heinous crimes, such as murder, offering a sense of closure to the victim's loved ones. While retribution may seem appealing on the surface, it does not achieve true justice. The death penalty does not necessarily offer closure to the victims' families and can instead prolong their suffering. It also raises significant ethical concerns about the morality of state-sanctioned killings. The argument that the death penalty brings closure to the victims' families is misleading. In fact, many families report the opposite: an increased sense of pain and trauma. Research by Dr. Michael Radelet, a sociologist at the University of Colorado, found that families of murder victims often experience more emotional suffering due to the lengthy process and repetitive legal process involved in the death penalty cases. Appeals can take years or even decades, preventing families from moving forward and allowing them to relive their trauma time and time again. The process of waiting for an execution is incredibly long and stressful and painful for victims' families. Rather than providing closure, the endless cycle of legal appeals and court hearings prolong the agony. According to the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, victims' families can be subjected to decades of uncertainty and emotional strain. This prolonged suffering is not a form of justice. it's a form of prolonged torture. The idea that the death penalty can provide retribution raises significant ethical questions. As a society, we have to ask ourselves whether it is immoral for the state to kill individuals, even if you have committed the most heinous crimes. Taking a name in the life of justice is a deeply troubling moral issue. The counterclaim suggests that imprisonment without parole is a more humane alternative that avoids these pitfalls, while still ensuring that offenders are held accountable for their actions. When we compare the claim that the death penalty deters crime with the counterclaim that it does not, it becomes clear that the deterrence argument is weak. Extensive studies show no correlation between the death penalty and lower crime rates, while other strategies like policing reforms have proven to be much more effective. Thus, the death penalty fails to achieve its intended purpose of detering crime. Similarly, the argument for retribution is undermined. While we consider the prolonged emotional toll on victims' families and the moral questions surrounding state-sanctioned executions, life imprisonment without parole offers an alternative that is both more humane and more likely to lead to true closure to victims' families without carrying ethical burden of execution. In weighing both sides, the argument against the death penalty are far more compelling. The death penalty fails as a deterrent, and it causes more harm than good for victims' families. Moreover, it is an inherently flawed and morally questionable practice. The evidence points to the conclusion that life imprisonment without the risk of execution is a fair, more humane option. Therefore, I firmly stand against the death penalty. It is an outdated, unjust practice that fails to achieve its intended practice and goals and causes way more harm than good. Abolishing the death penalty would be a significant step towards creating a more just and humane society. While supporters of the death penalty may argue that it brings justice and deters crime, these claims lack solid evidence and fail to achieve the true meaning behind it. I encourage you to reject the idea that the capital punishment is an idea that is good and effective in moral justice, and instead embrace alternatives that encourage rehabilitation and making people better overall. Thank you.